Hi, I'm Patrick Cobb with AARP South Carolina. We're pleased to be a sponsor of the Charleston Post and Courier's Pints and Politics series. AARP is a nonprofit organization, so we don't endorse candidates. For more information, go to aarp.org/SC.
At Westbrook Brewing Company in Mount Pleasant. Thank you to them for hosting us. And thank you also to AARP of South Carolina that generously is sponsoring Pints and Politics for a second year. Now I'm going to turn it over to our interviewers, political editor Skylar Croft, who has been covering politics in South Carolina for more than 30 years, and political reporter Jamie Lovegrove.
Congressman, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. Literally just flew in a few hours ago. Haven't showered in 2 days, and I'm here because I love you all.
Wow.
We appreciate that.
We appreciate this, and it's good for us to do this for the viewers. Let's begin with the last 24 hours or so. Can you explain your process in talking on the House floor? You really gave several messages, starting with that both sides are responsible. It's time to tone down the rhetoric.
Yeah.
You as a Republican, though, you particularly had to send your message at other conservatives and other Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, and I gave my first speech on the floor of the chamber yesterday. I had no intention of going onto the chamber floor in my first week in office. Typically, my MO is to be seen and not heard as a freshman for as long as possible. But with the events that happened on January 6th, I decided very pointedly that now was not the time to be quiet, that I did need to speak up, and even speak up against strongly members of my own party and the President of the United States, because being a mom with two kids and the future of our country really is at stake. We were in the middle of a constitutional crisis. I mean, really, particularly on January 6th. And I'm a very passionate person, and I did have several messages. I didn't have any notes when I spoke. I had my phone to time myself because they only allowed me to have 2 minutes of time. And so, one, I wanted to recognize that, first of all, the House of Representatives has every right to impeach the President of the United States. I think it's very important that we express how important it is to hold him accountable, because words have consequences. My life has been threatened throughout the rhetoric that's been going on the last couple of weeks, especially the days leading up to it. Someone threatened to shoot me on social media. This is not the country that I want to raise my children in. With the rhetoric that's out there, people will take those words literally. And since that time, I've had to increase my own personal security here when I'm in the district. I'm not doing any public events for the month of January. That was not the plan for the first 30 days at all. We were going to do public events every week. And now it's not safe to do so until we have a transition of power, which I hope is peaceful. But regards to the speech that I gave, one of the other messages was that everyone needs to be held accountable, from the president on down, including members of my own party that potentially incited this violence. There was allegedly a member of my own party that was allegedly live tweeting the location of the Speaker of the House during the breach on the Capitol. These things are not okay. I don't care how much you disagree with Nancy Pelosi, and everyone knows that I disagree with her on many things, but putting somebody's life in danger is unacceptable, and in my opinion is indefensible regardless of party. But one of the things I also talked about was, not only was Wednesday the 6th, it was not the first time we've seen violence in this country, that we have, as both parties, Republicans and Democrats, there are fringes of the far right and the far left that have contributed to the rhetoric that we're seeing in the country. There's been violence across our nation. And I feel that as elected leaders within both parties, that the first thing that we need to do is, one, acknowledge that we have a problem in this country. Like, we really and truly have crossed a line. And we need to recognize that we have a problem in this country. Number one, the elected people, Republicans and Democrats. The second thing that we need to do is take responsibility for our words and our actions, which is why I have been very vocal and spoken very strongly this week, even against members of my own party, because enough is enough. I mean, this is not okay.
Well, this is your statement that you said on the floor. I believe we need to hold the president accountable. Mm-hmm. I hold him accountable for the event that transpired, for the attack on our Capitol last Wednesday. But what is that accountability you're talking about, since you did not vote to impeach the president?
Right.
So there is a missing accountability there. You said there should be, but you did not take the ultimate action.
Right.
What is that accountability?
So with regards to impeachment, The problem with the impeachment process this week is that it was rushed. There was no due process. Typically, you would open an impeachment investigation. It would go through the judiciary process. We bypassed all of that altogether. And so for the same reasons that I voted to certify the Electoral College, because that's what the Constitution says, if you rush an impeachment, you set a dangerous precedent that there is no due process. No matter how guilty you think somebody is, there is always the right to due process. The other thing with that is that there was a bicameral, meaning both chambers in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. There was a bipartisan effort, Republicans and Democrats at both chambers, that offered up a censure resolution to, one, hold the president accountable, and two, prohibit him from running for office or holding office ever again. That effort was completely ignored by the Speaker of the House. So that was an effort to hold the president accountable that had bipartisan support, that had support in both chambers, and would not violate due process or someone's constitutional rights. And so that was very discouraging for me, because we ultimately, at the end of the day, we absolutely need to hold him accountable. And are unable to do that in a bipartisan manner because the impeachment was rushed. There are Republicans that wanted to impeach, but they wanted it done in the proper way. And the other thing with the impeachment going to the U.S. Senate, it's not going to get there until the 19th of January. Rushing it this way, the Senate's not in until the 19th. Biden gets sworn in on the 20th. So there's going to be a dark cloud. Do you really want to spend the first 100 days of his presidency doing the impeachment investigation? And there's some debate on whether or not you can have a trial if he's not in office. So it was problematic for many reasons, but primarily because of the Constitution. I'm a constitutional conservative. That's my guiding principle in everything that I do. And because of what happened on the 6th of January, it's incumbent upon Republicans to work with the Biden administration. I think now more than ever, we need to show that we can work together and work across the aisle. And that's something that I'm intent on doing. My first 30 days, this is not what I had planned. I had all these ideas of things that we needed to focus on, but now the focus on is what can we do together?
You know, we all saw the events
Mhm.
on January 6th. We all watched on television. You were actually there.
Yeah.
I imagine you've probably had a chance to see at least some of the president's speech at this point. What exactly, you talk about this being rushed. What exactly do you not know that you would want to know that would change your view on this? And would you have been open to impeachment?
Absolutely.
If you had
I
learned
said
more?
that. Yeah. And my statement's on the floor. The House has every right to impeach him, but it's not the evidence. There's been no evidence that's been presented. It didn't go through judiciary process. There was zero due process. Really, it was approximately a 2-hour debate on the floor of the House of Representatives. So you eliminate due process. So no matter how guilty you think the president is, if you set that precedent, if you ignore the Constitution and the rule of law, then what's preventing our country from doing that for any person? And so that's why the Constitution is important for us to follow, to have that guiding principle. That's why I was really disappointed that the Speaker wouldn't even allow the resolution. There were multiple censure resolutions that were going around, drafted by Republicans, drafted by Democrats. One of them had the exact same language as the impeachment resolution, the articles of impeachment, that had bipartisan support and would not have violated someone's rights to due process. That would have, one, condemned him for it, and then a couple of the censure resolutions that I saw would have prevented him from holding office. So two different mechanisms that we could have used, and the Speaker would only allow one of them that was more partisan than the other. The censure resolution had much more bipartisan support.
There were 10 Republicans who did end up
Mhm.
voting for this, and I do want to ask you about a couple of them.
Yeah.
One, first of all,
Don't make me violate Reagan's 11th commandment, though.
you can speak however candidly you would like, but one
Yeah.
was from our delegation.
Mhm.
I am curious, have you talked to Congressman Rice this week? Did you have any idea that he seemed to surprise a lot of folks, including other folks in delegation I've talked to?
Mhm.
Have you talked to him about his decision to do that, and what did you make of his reasoning?
I have seen him since he made that vote, and I think, I'm not going to speak for Congressman Rice, but I support his decision. I mean, this was an unprecedented event that happened, and folks had to figure out their conscience and how they could get there. For me, the Constitution, the way I interpreted it, it wiped out due process, and his interpretation was slightly different, as were 9 others. There were 10 total Republicans that voted to impeach, and I'm going to be thinking about him. I voted. I mean, he's going through what I went through 10 days ago and had been going through. I'm sure he's receiving threats I'm sure that he's being attacked all across the internet and all across all social media platforms. And so when I spoke to him, I offered up my sincere empathy, because I've been going through this for 10 days now, actually a little bit more than that, since Thomas Novelli broke the story that I was going to certify the results of the Electoral College. I mean, it really ratcheted up, and I feel what he is likely going through right now, emotionally and mentally. When you're attacked and when you're threatened that way, these are things that we have to take seriously, because people are taking words literally and want to do harm just because they disagree with you politically, and it's wrong and it's un-American.
And then one other I just wanted to ask you about is Liz Cheney, who is, of course, the third ranking Republican in the House. I want to ask you two questions quickly about her. One is I wanted to ask if you disagree, not with her decision to impeach, but with one particular sentence in her statement in which she said there has never been a greater betrayal by the president of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. Do you disagree with that?
I didn't read her statement. I don't disagree. I praise Representative Cheney for her leadership in a time of crisis. This was a true constitutional crisis, and she showed very strong leadership throughout, and I praise her for that. She's been a role model for many of us over the last 10 days.
Do you support, there have been efforts from some Republicans, I'm sure you're aware, to remove her from her leadership role?
No, I don't. And the irony that I find in all this, these are the same people that were yelling and screaming about the president First Amendment right being banned on social media, yet want to silence her voice as well. So there's some hypocrisy there that I vehemently disagree with. Everyone has the right. She has the right to her opinion, the right to her decision, the right to vote her conscience, the right to her viewpoints, especially because she's in leadership.
Not all of our questions tonight are going to be about the riot and impeachment.
Yeah.
So I'd like to recognize our sponsor, which is South Carolina AARP. They're asking the percentage of the state's COVID vaccine allotment has been very slow to reach those who want it. Going forward, what can you do to ensure that South Carolina receives its fair share?
So I don't have the exact statistic. I did receive a call from one of our low country state house reps today while I was on the plane flying back, and talking about the percentage of or number of vaccinations we have per 1,000 people or per 100,000 people versus the national average. So that is something that was brought to my attention this afternoon. I've been traveling, so have not had time to dive into it and see what can be done. But it sounds like the percentage or statistically the percentage of vaccinations we have per population for our population is vastly lower than the rest of the country. So we do need to get to the bottom of it very soon, ASAP.
On top of that, too, do you support another COVID relief package coming out? I know there's chatter of that now.
Yeah.
And, again, there's debate on should we go to that $2,000 check level? Would you support that $2,000 check level per
Yeah.
American?
So I know that President-elect Biden announced just literally, I think within the hour, that he's going to push for, I think, a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. I don't know anything about it. I have not read it. I will look at the text once it is presented to us and dive into it. One of the issues that I have had with the stimulus that was the second round, the one in December, was that they were not being targeted just to the businesses, small businesses that needed the relief, or the people who are out of work through no fault of their own. It was sort of blanketed. So, for example, I qualified for a stimulus check. I shouldn't get a stimulus check because I didn't lose income because of COVID. I lost income because I decided to run for Congress. That was my personal decision, and I shouldn't qualify for that. The other thing that I disagreed with the stimulus package of last time is that if you're making $75K a year, and your income was not down, your wages weren't down because of COVID, you still got a stimulus check. And so if we're going to, it doesn't really matter to me necessarily the amount at this juncture. It's really ensuring that it's specifically targeted to those who've lost wages, who've lost salaries due to COVID-19, who are out of work through no fault of their own. We need to continue unemployment while we don't continue to incentivize unemployment. South Carolina's done a really good job with the ability of getting people back to work, keeping our economy open. We've done a remarkable job compared to other states, but other states are not as well off as we are. But it's got to be very, very targeted, whether that's $1,400, which I think is what the Biden administration is talking about. It's lower than the 2,000 mark. My only sort of condition is that it needs to be really specifically targeted to those people, because our country is running out of money. I mean, our deficit is $4 trillion. Our debt is enormous right now. We've got to be very careful that we are really targeted to those who need it most.
I mean, the potential drawback to means testing these checks, for example, that people have argued against, is that it could make it harder to get them out the door. I mean, it adds another layer to this that, we are trying to do this as urgently as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, is that any concern of yours?
Well, we've done the federal government has done a really good job of being able to do it quickly. Like if you filed your tax returns online, you received a direct deposit. So I am not, I mean, there should be a threshold. It shouldn't be everybody gets a check. It should be those that really, really and truly need it.
So we do want to go back to last week a little bit, and actually talk just about the day of January 6th and your experience on January 6th. Could you kind of take us through, now that we do have a week of removal, what the sort of the TikTok of the day for you, how you learned what was going on? We were all watching on the news, but you were in the building. You may not have seen that as it was happening.
Yeah, it was when I saw it the next day, I was just horrified. I mean, really. And it was when you're going through that kind of experience, it feels surreal. But I'll back up a few days before that. So I flew up on Saturday before swearing in. I brought my kids. You could see in the photos that we posted on social media, they had their backpacks on with their carry-on luggage. Their backpacks were full to the tilt because they had their computers, their textbooks, their notebooks. They were going to stay up the entire week. Because of COVID-19, they're unable to go to school in person. So we were all like, okay, how cool would it be? Roam the halls of Congress and do virtual school in mom's office. I mean, that's like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so they were all excited. Staying in a hotel is something new and different you don't normally get to do. They'd never been in an Uber car before. So they had their first Uber ride when we landed, and they were all excited. They were giddy with excitement. But by Sunday night, seeing the rhetoric online, the messages we were receiving, it became very apparent that it potentially was going to be very unsafe on the 6th. So Sunday afternoon around 4 or 5 o'clock, I called the airlines and I got them on the first flight out with my family on Monday morning. And they were up at 5, out the door at 6, on a plane by 8 something in the morning to get them back. And so when Wednesday happened, when the event started to unfold, I would have been devastated if they were there. So not only was my life put in danger, but if my kids were in DC with me, their lives would have been in danger. And I don't know, I would have been beside myself. I would have been devastated if they were there. But so that afternoon, we had the first joint session to certify the Electoral College, where the vice president presided over the joint session. So we had senators and congressmen and women in the chamber at that time for the joint session. And I was there being a freshman my first week. I said, this is historic. I want to be part of it. Some people stayed in their offices, but I wanted to be on the floor. I wanted to be in the chamber and witness history. And when the first state that was objected to, Arizona, came up, was when we dispersed and we went into recess. So the senators went to their chamber, and then the House members that were objecting and those that wanted to watch could stay in the chamber. So I decided that I would go back to my office while they were debating the objections. And at that point in time, we were told that there was a threat on Cannon office building, which is where my office is. So my office was evacuated. The entire building was evacuated. And I found myself in a corner office in Longworth somewhere, I think 4th or 5th floor. My staff met me where we huddled and sat and wait, not knowing what was going on. We found out later that there were pipe bombs that were found just very near where I get dropped off to go into the office. Like I practically walked by a pipe bomb to get into my building. And so when we were told we could return to our offices, I then got stuck in a tunnel underneath the Capitol because we were told we could return too soon. They were still clearing the building and making sure it was safe. So I was in a tunnel underground the Capitol with about 100 other people, but I happened to be standing next to Dan Crenshaw. So I said, okay, if I am in danger, I mean, I sort of look at this and I've joked with him after it later, but I'm next to a military vet, hell of a badass military vet. I'm going to be okay. If I'm next to Crenshaw, but we were there for several minutes until we were able to go back into Cannon. And he walked with us, with my staff, back to the office. But as the minute that we got back in the office that afternoon, we were put on lockdown because that is the moment that they started to breach the Capitol and get through the doors, break the windows, and get into the halls of the Capitol. And we had to, in lockdown, we had to turn out the lights, we had to lock the doors, draw the shades, and be quiet. And all you could hear were sirens of law enforcement racing to the Capitol to protect protect all of us. And it was scary. You felt like a sitting duck because the only thing standing between us and the rioters were the Capitol Police, who were outnumbered. And we had no weapons. There was nothing to protect ourselves other than a solid wooden door and a lock. That was it. And so for hours and hours and hours, we huddled in the offices doing what we could to be quiet. And all you knew that there were threats, that there were pipe bombs that were out there. We heard about a cooler full of Molotov cocktails. It was one of the worst moments I've ever had in my life. And I don't wish anyone to go through that. And I think the after effects emotionally and mentally of that kind of event will last days, weeks, and months for some people. I got a call early this morning from a member that had to call last night, a counselor at midnight last night, trying to emotionally get through, now that we've had a week and a half since this happened, or just over a week, to really digest and process what we just went through. And I never want to see anything like it again. And I think that my anger stemmed from the rhetoric leading up to this moment. And it was so violent. 5 people died, including a Capitol Hill police officer. The president refused to lower the flag to half staff for several days. I had to write a letter to the president to ask him to do that. And so it's just, when you look back at it, it's something I never want anyone to ever have to experience again. And I will continue to strongly speak out and do my best to do what's right.
Was there any conduct on the part of your colleagues that you saw or heard of that maybe hasn't been told yet that really stands? I'm sorry, was there any conduct on the part of your colleagues that you heard of or experienced that really stands out as particularly heroic that day, that something that you were impressed with? I know Congressman Clyburn was, he said Mitch McConnell did a heck of a job getting all the people back together and finishing the process. What else stands out to you that you saw from another member?
Well, the story, Senator Tim Scott, the story of him being in the chamber and rolling up his sleeves and grabbing some pens, to just, I mean, that we were really, you're helpless. You were a sitting duck. For the members that were in the chamber, taking apart furniture. So they were using legs of chairs to defend themselves if they were in the chamber when the rioters came through. But I've been speaking out against my colleagues. I think everyone that potentially had a hand in this, that enabled and incited this violence, needs to be investigated, including members of Congress. There was a story of a member of my own party allegedly live tweeting the location of the Speaker of the House. This is enormously problematic and needs to be investigated. And every single person needs to be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law.
Do you think by saying that your relationships with those lawmakers is non-existent by pointing them out? Then
potentially. I don't point out individuals by name. Reagan's 11th commandment is something I do believe in, but what happened that day is inexcusable. It's indefensible, and in some cases unforgivable. 5 people died that day. Had my children been there, they would have been in danger. I was in danger. My staff was in danger. All of our lives were put at risk. And that is something that I take very seriously. It is a promise that I said when I was running for office. I am fiscally conservative, but I am, when I need to speak up, even against members of my own party, I'm going to do that. It's very important that we take responsibility for our words and for our actions. And that's something that we've got to take seriously on both sides of the aisle. I fully believe that we can't allow this to happen again. And we're hearing chatter. You've read about it in the papers and in the press that there's some events that people want to be violent on the 17th. And then again at inauguration on the 20th. We have 20,000 soldiers on our Capitol right now. The place is entirely shut down. There are 20,000 law enforcement and officers that are up there protecting our nation's Capitol. I've never seen anything like it.
Will you
because
be up there?
of those threats.
Will you be up there on inauguration day?
A week ago, I said, yes, I want to be up there. It's important for Republicans to be there, but I'm worried about my safety. So I'm not going to attend inauguration. I am very worried about safety, not only my own personal safety, even when I'm here in district, but even especially up in DC. So when I am moving around right now, I'm not wearing anything that's identifiable as a member of Congress. I think it's important that, that we take the necessary steps to be safe, not only to protect ourselves, but protect our staff and our offices. I've told my staff for the month of January, don't come into the office. We're going to work remotely, work from home, work from wherever you want. We're going to be working. And right now we're, even through all of this, our constituent services, we're responding to constituents within 24 hours right now. I've got an incredible team who are working extremely hard, but I do not want to put anyone in danger until we get through the inauguration and things, the temperature, the rhetoric, once it calms down. But I am disappointed. There are Republicans and Democrats that are still ratcheting up rhetoric, and it's divisive, and it's just pouring gasoline on the fire right now.
Some critics have said you obviously voted to certify the election. You did not vote to object. 5 of your South Carolina colleagues did vote to object, and 100 plus other Republicans did too. And there have been some critics who said that those folks, by giving some credence to this, these sort of baseless allegations that the election was stolen. This rally was called "Stop the Steal."
Yeah.
That they bear some responsibility as well for what happened last week. Do you believe that they share any responsibility?
The South Carolina delegation, they're not QAnon conspiracy theorists. I mean, I have spoken out against. I didn't know a whole lot about Q, and then once I started reading after the 6th what this was really all about, I mean, you sort of brush it off and think, okay, this really isn't like a real thing. But then I started reading it, and I was just astounded and confounded, and just couldn't believe that people actually believe this. Yes, quite frankly. And there are members of Congress that have that conspire, that talk about QAnon. They are QAnon conspiracy theorists. I've been very outspoken against some of this online and privately, and some of those conversations unfortunately were leaked. But I've been a very vocal voice that these are not the people we need to be listening to. These are not the people who should be leading us out of this crisis. They're the ones that let us into it, and we sure as hell shouldn't be the ones that let them lead us out of it. And that's just really important. But our delegation, I voted differently, and I don't, that they voted their conscience on the certification process. My view of the Constitution was different. And that's just the way that it was.
Is it important for Republicans at this point, not only to acknowledge that Biden will be the president on January 21st, but that he will legitimately and lawfully have won the election?
Yeah, no, for sure. It absolutely is. And one of the things actually 2 of the things, there were 2 big lies that were told since November. It was almost like there was a light switch with the rhetoric. At November 4th, it just all ratcheted up. You saw it from the president on down, and it got worse and worse as the weeks went on. But the first lie is that the Congress could overturn the results of an election legally certified in all 50 states. Now, whether or not you believe there was voter fraud or not, I'm a cynic. I think there's fraud in every election, whether that's a voting machine that's down or someone being able to vote by provisional ballot because they moved 2 counties over. I've talked to lawmakers in Pennsylvania that there's systematic voter fraud, but it's been going on for decades. It's not new to 2020. It wasn't new in 2016. It's been going on for a very long time, and something they're trying to rectify. But to lie to the American people, to tell them that Congress via the Constitution could overthrow the results of a legally certified election in all 50 states just simply wasn't true. And then the second lie that was told by the president was that the vice president could overturn the results of the election. Also not true. And I have praised Vice President Mike Pence for his leadership, but 2, when the president came out with that statement and started attacking the vice president about it, Vice President Pence made it very clear that he didn't have that authority, that power, or that right. And so that took courage, and I praised him for that. But there were also politicians that were taking advantage of the hearts, the minds, and the wallets of these people who believed the election was rigged. There was over $500 million raised in order to stop the steal or fight voter fraud, and hardly any of it, almost none of it, was spent to fight voter fraud. And that's a fleecing, and it's dishonest. And because I refused to participate in the lies, I was attacked, and my life has been threatened. And so that's not okay. And it's not something I'm going to condone. And I want to be sure that I said it during my campaign that I would not lie to my constituents, and I wouldn't lie to the American people, no matter the outcome. And everyone knows I supported the president and wanted him to win, but he didn't.
Well, based on, just let me add this too, is the vice president and the president both campaigned for you.
Yeah.
When was the last time you spoke with either one of them, and how did those conversations go? And do you intend to ever speak to the president again?
I'm trying to think. I know I spoke to both of them after the November election. They were just normal 5-minute conversations, and there was nothing in particular that in particular that stands out to me. They were less than 5 minutes, more or less just congratulatory phone calls on the race. That's one of my greatest disappointments in the out of what happened on January 6th is that every gain that Republicans had, every accomplishment that Trump had in his administration is all wiped out. We literally have to start over. We have to start from scratch if we're going to earn the trust of the American people back. And we've got to rebuild our country. We've got to rebuild our party.
Was going to Washington what you expected, especially in light of coming out of the State House here? Is there just that much more animosity up there than here? It seemed most lawmakers in Columbia seem to get along, even as different parties.
It is far more partisan in DC than it is in the State House by far. And I don't know yet how you bridge that gap, but one of the silver linings of, I believe, me coming out and being so vocal and being so strong in my voice over the last 10 days is that I have heard from Republicans and Democrats who want to work together. I've been invited to I've been invited to a couple of different caucuses that are bipartisan in nature, problem solvers being one of them, but there are multiple caucuses. But I've heard from as many Democrats as I have had Republicans that have been reaching out that want to work across the aisle. And I think especially after January 6th, it's more incumbent upon us to do that now more than ever.
Well, we also received a large number of reader questions that had things to ask you, and a lot of them were repetitive, but we had to pull out a couple, and this one was interesting. What is your opinion concerning big tech companies that are censoring communication of Americans by shutting down Twitter accounts, Parler apps? Is there anything you would expect Congress to do about this, or do you believe that as private companies they have the right to do so?
Well, Twitter, for example, is a private company. They have the right to set their own business standards, their own rules. I do take exception. If you're going to shut down the president's account, then why are we not shutting down the Chinese government, Ayatollahs, or the supreme leader of Iran, people that are calling for genocide, or people that are calling for terrorism on American soil or to murder Americans? Those people should also have the same standard across the board, be equal opportunity about it, do it across the board. But what I was reading today on Parler, that a lot of this violence and the violence that was planned after the 6th was planned on those kinds of apps on social media. And some of the language and the things that I was reading, they're horrific. And they can't be repeated. I mean, you can't repeat that on social media right now, things that were said and planned to do, but it's scary.
Do you support, so there's been talk about eliminating Section 230, which is this law that shields social media companies from legal liability for stuff that is posted on their platform by their users. So you can't sue Twitter over a tweet you don't like. You could maybe sue the person who tweeted it if it's defamation or something like that, but you can't sue Twitter. This has been a big topic over the last few months. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, I think that social media, I mean, if they're going to ban, they got to do it across the board if that's their standard. I do have issues with allowing terrorism on social media, I was threatened on Facebook. Someone threatened to shoot me. So my issue with 230 was having it included in the NDAA. I think it's something we've got to debate when we are doing and passing large pieces of legislation like NDAA. It needs to be relevant to the legislation, totally irrelevant to funding of our military.
It may be hard for these social media companies to exist if Section 230 goes away. If they're getting sued for every tweet, every Facebook post that gets posted,
right,
they may no longer exist, at least.
But it's worth having that debate and having that discussion and figuring out how do we go to from here? How do we not take away someone's First Amendment right, but also keep people safe? I mean, you just can't threaten to kill somebody online and then not be held accountable for it either. And I'm sure now more than ever, our law enforcement are inundated with these reports. I mean, I gotten several of them myself, and I know I'm not the only one.
Another reader question was about climate change. What climate change policies will you advocate for that will specifically help the 1st District and the rest of South Carolina addressing sea level rise, loss of life, homes, commercial structures from flooding, and loss of soil for crops from flooding or drought?
Definitely an issue that I want to work on. That was a priority for me in my first 100 days. Right now, because of everything that's happened, I've got to look for ways to work across the aisle. Environmental issues will be one of them. I'm part of the American Flood Coalition, and I will be leaning on leaders in the in environmental policy to find ways that I can ideologically align with folks in the climate change movement, Republicans and Democrats. I think it's really important to do that. There are a lot of resources. There are a lot of folks who've come to me to offer to help and see what that looks like. Sea levels are rising. We're seeing that in Charleston. That is important to recognize. But right now, we're all distracted by all the violence that has happened. My focus over the next 10 days is to ensure there's a peaceful transition of power, to ensure that we hold people accountable. But that is something that is high on my list right now, that we've got to work toward. In fact, before I was sworn in on one of my weeks of orientation, I was meeting with folks who were leaders in environmental policy to figure that out. One of the things that I did as a state lawmaker was draft a bill that would map by LIDAR radar the entire state of South Carolina, so we knew where specifically the flooding was and how it was happening, whether it was rain or whether it was a hurricane, where it would come in, how high the water would rise, how high sea level is rising. We've got to be able to identify what the problem is and where it is before we can figure out how we're going to solve it. But that was something I worked on as a state lawmaker and will intend to do going forward.
And on that note, I mean, once we get beyond these 10 days,
it's been a rough first 10 days. I got to tell you, and the next 10 are going to be, I think, equally rough just to get through.
Once we get
the swearing in,
the pandemic, because that may take up a lot of your time over the next couple months as well. What do you consider your top priorities? What would be the issues that are most
jobs? I mean, ensuring jobs in the economy, that we get our economic engine back. South Carolina is doing better than most states. I think our unemployment is still hovering just over 4% or so. But ensuring that we try to keep our taxes low, that we do things to encourage businesses to start up, grow, and thrive, even during the pandemic. And not shutting everything down. If people can and want to work, then they should have the opportunity to. We've done great down here, but there are other places in the country that are not doing as well. So ensuring we have the right resources for people. I really, really worry as a mom right now with COVID, education, especially for kids that don't have access to the internet. There are thousands of children that are being left behind right now. But certainly supporting small businesses. Healthcare is another one because of COVID-19. The vaccination issue, like I mentioned earlier, I got a call about it from a member of the State House of Representatives, and that's something we got to get South Carolina. We've got to get more vaccinations for our population down here. So healthcare is definitely an issue, and then environmental policy as well. But with the events of January 6th, really everything's been turned upside down.
There has been talk that the president should issue pardons to some of the folks that invaded the Capitol. Would you consider that a mistake? And how would you envision or get your head around what the judiciary has to do with prosecuting these people? Now, I mean, there's 100 cases now, but it could easily be 5,000. What should the Republican caucus and the members of Congress be saying about these prosecutions? And do these people deserve jail time?
They absolutely do. And anyone that participated in the violent riots that invaded our Capitol on the 6th, that incited anarchy, should be held to the fullest extent of the law. I'm not an attorney, so I'm still wrapping my head around what happened and getting through that over the last 10 days. And we had to go back up there on the impeachment votes this week. So there's been a lot of travel. But anyone that was involved in this riot needs to be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. And it may take time, but nobody from that riot should be pardoned. Absolutely no one.
We have heard from some local Republican Party officials that some members of their rank and file, in their words, are disappointed that you didn't join this effort to object to the Electoral College results. There is always talk about primarying folks. We're certainly hearing this in the 7th District right now with Tom Rice. Has the threat of a primary challenge crossed your mind? And what would you tell folks if they were to challenge you on that?
Yeah, and that may very well be a repercussion from my voting to certify the Electoral College. But I promised the folks when I was elected that I would follow the Constitution no matter what, even if you don't like the outcome. I am a constitutional conservative. I've voted like that as a state lawmaker, and I will put my record up against anyone that would want to challenge me. But I also don't operate out of fear. So I'm going to do the right thing no matter what. And I made the right decision, and I'm on the right side of history on this one. And I think it's extremely important that when we have a constitutional crisis, our number one priority is to follow our founding fathers and do what our Constitution insists we do.
The Republican Party over this is related to this over the last 4 years has become very much centered around one person. And Trump has become, a litmus test, and whether you are with him or against him is the only thing that matters to some folks. Do you think that stranglehold that he seems to have on a huge swath, not all, but a huge swath of the Republican base is going to hold? What do you foresee as the future of the Republican Party over the next few years? Well, I will say this, the more I hear about the events of January 6th and the things that led up to it, the worse it gets. So I think over time that that stranglehold will loosen as people find clarity and they see what happened. They hear the stories, they watch the footage, they see the video. I can tell you going through it, I felt one thing, but the very next day when I actually saw it, and then the day after, I got angrier and angrier, particularly when I think about my children who were supposed to be up there. And if I hadn't had that instinct, being very worried about my safety and my kids' safety, if I hadn't had that instinct, they would have been there and their lives would have been put at risk. And to me, that's unforgivable and it's indefensible. And so I think for some people, they're still in denial, but over time, I hope and pray that they will see clarity and see what happened and we'll see why it happened. And as people are arrested and things and it gets investigated and more comes out, I think it'll be very clear in the long term. And I know that we're on the right side of history on this one. Do you hope that he does not run in 2024, as has been talked about? I don't know how he could, given everything that happened on January 6th, how the American people were fleeced and lied to, and the violence that occurred where 5 people died, including a Capitol Hill police officer. And then a few days later, another Capitol police officer committed suicide. I don't know how you come back from that. Unfortunately, and I supported the president. He supported me. I mean, this was devastating for the Republican Party.
Even before he was campaigning seriously in the state, he was recognized by the Citadel Republican Society. It's the largest group on campus. He was given the ceremonial musket that goes with that. But it also runs with the code at the Citadel. And you as a grad know that they don't tolerate anyone who lies, cheats, or steals. Does President Trump
You're not going to ask me that question.
fit with that in that mold, or is he outside the Citadel honor code?
Well, he didn't graduate from the Citadel, and I think the Citadel Republican Society is separate from the college. So any decision that they make to strip him of that would be their right and their decision. And you are seeing not only the media hold the president accountable, but we're seeing corporations also hold the president accountable, where he's not going to be able to bank his the PGA pulled out of one of his golf courses. There are companies that are now pulling back their support from Republicans who objected, and especially from QAnon conspiracy theorists within my own party, whose rhetoric helped enable and encourage some of the violence to transpire, is my belief that happened. And they're seeing that as well. And I think that the repercussions will be far and wide in the weeks and months ahead.
Does he stand the scrutiny of the Citadel honor code?
Of course, he's the president of the United States.
I think we have come to a close. We are going to wrap it up now. We want to thank everyone, especially South Carolina AARP, and we always finish what we're doing with a lightning round.
Okay.
So we're going to go with this, and we're going to let Jamie go first.
Who is your favorite member of the freshman class?
Oh, man, I have a lot of favorite members. They're all good. And yeah, I love them all. Peter Mayer and I really bonded. I bonded with a lot. And in fact, it was funny. I went to Liz Cheney before we were having this votes a couple of days, and I said, does this make me establishment or just make you libertarian? And so you saw, politics sometimes make strange bedfellows. I bonded with Dan Crenshaw because we were stuck in an underground tunnel. I really had an opportunity to get to know so many members through the last 10 days. Probably would have taken me 10 months to build those relationships with people.
What would be your dream committee assignment if you could pick and choose anything on Capitol Hill?
T&I, transportation and infrastructure. We have the port. We have Boeing, Volvo, Mercedes. We have so many defense contractors and subcontractors. Now with Boeing exclusively making the Dreamliner here starting in March, that committee would be somewhere I would want to be for the long term. It touches the defense industry, it touches environment, it touches financial services because of how it's funded and bonding and everything. So that would be a place where if I could be, that is the dream committee. And that's where I would want to be for my tenure.
And actually, if I could just ask you about infrastructure real quick,
Mhm.
Congressman Clyburn has said that his post-pandemic first priority is infrastructure, that he would like to see a comprehensive infrastructure package.
That would be wonderful.
Have you talked to him about that at all? Is that something you could work with him on?
Well, we've been a little busy the last 10 days and so he's very busy right now, but that would be great. The problem that I keep hearing about with regards to the infrastructure package is funding. How do we fund it? So previously, someone will put forth a great infrastructure package and then no way to fund it. And so that's where if I get on T&I, that'll be a priority for me to figure out, well, how are we going to pay for it?
What is your favorite office decoration as you've been building out your office?
I don't
over the
have any
last,
office
few weeks?
decorations
You
right now.
haven't really-
I said paint the walls white, and that's.
You haven't brought anything from home yet?
I brought like a South Carolina like palmetto tree wooden carving thing that I had hanging up in my house with the crescent moon. I have that, and then I think by my window in my office, but I don't have anything really up there right
Some more
now.
time to move
I
in.
need some. It's been a rough 10 days, and so. In the future, maybe let's get past the 20th and maybe in February I can start thinking about that. But my priority really has been with the people of the district. I'm really proud of my team. I want to praise every person on the staff and in the office. They've been remarkable in the first 10 days. They've seen a hurricane and tornado. They've seen it all. And even still through everything, they've managed to respond to everyone who's called, emailed, and written the office within 24 hours. And I'm super, super proud of the hard work that my staff has put in.
What's been the best piece of advice that you've gotten in the last week?
Well, I've been praised for speaking out strongly, and members have asked me to continue to do that. And that gives me great confidence to know that I made the right decision, not only on the way that I voted, but in the way that I've spoken out too.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for
taking
having
the
me
time.
again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.